Welcome to Playthink, conversations about games, interactivity, art, and culture. This podcast is recorded live at the USC Game Innovation Lab, which is part of the USC Games program at the University of Southern California. For more information, follow us on Instagram at USC Game Innovation Lab or visit our website at gameinnovationlab.com/playthink.
So, hi everyone. Welcome to Playthink Salon, where we dive deep into the worlds of game, art, culture, and interactivity. My name is Zhutian Zhang. I also go by Z as in XYZ. I'm a first-year MS student in the interactive media and game design program. And I used to work in Japan as a level designer for over 6 years in companies like FromSoft and Capcom. I'm honored to be here today to host this episode, and I'll be having a conversation with Christopher Totten. Chris, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, Chris is an assistant professor of game design at Kent State University. He's also the founder of Pie for Breakfast Studios, a Northeast Ohio area indie game company. He has done work as an artist, animator, level designer, and project manager in the game industry. He holds a master's degree in architecture with a concentration in digital media from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Chris is an organizer for the Smithsonian American Art Museum in the Arcade and a lifetime member of the International Game Developer Association. Chris has written articles featured on Gamasutra, Game Career Guide, and other publications, and is a frequent speaker at game industry conferences such as GDC, GDC China, East Coast Game Conference, GDEX, and others. He has written multiple books on design, including An Architecture Approach to Level Design, which is an industry bestseller and has also been translated into Japanese. He's also the author of World Design in 2D Action Adventures. And today, we're going to be talking about his book, An Architectural Approach to Level Design, which is one of my favorite books that has guided me into the world of level design. And during my last project at Capcom, I also used this book as a study material for the junior designers on the level design team. So Chris, before we jump into the actual contents of your book, as I was saying, this book was one of those I used to study level design myself and for new higher education in the company. But I think for most of them, for most of the level design book I used to read, I think they tend to focus on a perspective of like more practical design theory or from more like a game play related perspective. So you actually wrote this book from a standpoint of architecture. So I would assume one of the reasons for it is because of your background in architecture. But were there other intentions or thoughts that you had back when you made this choice?
So it's, I was, when I was in architecture school, I also was on my college's swim team. And I had a friend who was in computer science and I was in architecture, and I knew things like Photoshop and 3D Studio Max, and this friend of mine approached me one day and he says, hey, why don't we make video games together? Famous last words. And so we tried to make video games together, and it went okay. But I kind of caught the bug of game design. And that's actually where I started reading. This was around the time that a lot of books about game design were starting to come out from an academic perspective. And I read things like Rules of Play and others. Eventually, like after graduation, I got a hand on a game design workshop and utilized that. So I was, reading all this material, and somebody finally said to me in my architecture studio, you've been doing a lot of reading on game design. Why don't you incorporate some of that into your architecture design? And like the light bulb went off. You could kind of see that light bulb go off from space, I think. So I started doing it, looking at game worlds according to the principles of architecture, and thought, there's a lot here. And the thing about architecture versus games is that, I had a lot of professors who were very influenced by postmodernist architecture, which is very like about form, right? And so we would always get into these arguments about, game design is very human centric. It's about use. It's about what the player is thinking and feeling and um, doing, and like what's going on in their brains as they play, right? I mean, Brian Upton is here, like situational game design, right? What's going through the player's head as they play. So we'd have these arguments about like it should be for the people on the ground from that perspective. It should be for the form and things like that. So it became this approach to architectural thinking that when I started working in the games industry, I was like, this is really handy. Um, Around 2012 or so, I remember being at GDC and a lot of people being like, this architecture thing sounds really cool. Maybe I should learn more about it. But I don't know where to start. And I'm sitting there like, I could help. So I, got to writing, and I'd written a few articles for Gamma Sutra at that point. So it turned out to be something that people really responded to. So I was really excited about that. But yeah, that's where it came from.
Right, right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I think you mentioned that you're trying to explain or trying to teach people how to do level design through like an architecture perspective, right? So I think for like many people, including not just players, I think including game designers, they still have this kind of thought that they think game as primarily a entertainment or a kind of technology. So I think from your perspective, like how does an architectural mindset help people, well, not just game designer, but also players, appreciate like all the video games as a sort of like a cultural artifacts, like more specifically as design experiences that shape our like emotions, movements, or even like the meanings behind them.
So it's funny, we were having this conversation a lot now at Kent State. So I'm the lead faculty member. I'm an associate professor there, and we are, we're talking a lot about these different collaborations between units, right? And one of the things that we're looking at is, we work with the art department a lot, specifically, and a lot of that is under the umbrella of games. It almost sounds cliche to say now, but I do believe in that idea of games as like a 21st century liberal art. I think that um, games are an art made of a bunch of other arts. And if you read some of my academic writing now, a lot of it is focused on this idea of, we game studies often is looking at games as this big, like I have a Game Boy here, I can use it as a prop. Game, right? Like here is game, and the game is the work. But anybody that's made a game knows that a game is like sprites and 3D models and music and sound and programming and all these other things that go into making the game, and each of those are the output of an artist using their art knowledge or using their composition knowledge or their programming knowledge. And if we look at it that way, levels are in a way pieces of architecture. There's just architecture with different goals than necessarily, sometimes the same, sometimes different. You can't really knock them down in the same way unless you make them fall in a game. And we get to use lava. That's cool. I like lava and monsters. Um, so, the architectural mindset is really responding to the knowledge that goes into making any of these pieces that come together to make a game. So games really do have, you mentioned cultural artifacts. They are, it is interesting to look at like NES Contra and see like burly dudes with machine guns and headbands from the 80s and be like, that is so 80s. That sprite is an 80s sprite. But then you have Cuphead, which is a cartoon that looks like the 30s, but is responsible for like a resurgence in like a sort of rubber hose style in animation today. But it's very similar to Contra. Like it's a very similar game to Contra, in terms of gameplay mechanics. And if we start to drill down into these things, we can see the markers in all of these places in games. So, architectural thinking is really just more like really looking at it as a piece of art that occurs in a time and a place, and like you would any art analysis.
Right, right. Awesome. Thank you. And that is to say that in order to have this kind of architectural kind of mindset, we kind of have to put us in the shoes of the actual architects. So when you think about that, like, do you actually use, like, I think you teach level design like using more like traditional architectural tools like plans, like sections, like diagrams. So why do you think these methods like still matter in the digital age? Because now I think people tend to get the work done by using like directly in the engine. They got more like a better sense to the, to a 3D perspective of making things. So like, and personally, I do think like doing flow charts, doing like top-down view charts still is a crucial way to express your like organize your thoughts before you actually jump into anything that is going to be practical. So what is your thoughts on those kind of things?
So I actually, you mentioned I teach a level design course. I have it coming up in the spring here at Kent State. And one of the first assignment I have them do is throughout the semester, they have to keep a sketchbook, like a pen and paper sketchbook. And the first assignment in that class is that they have to pick a level of a video game. It could be any level of any video game, 3D or 2D. And then they have to draw 3 different drawings of it, plan, section, and then an axonometric, which is, think of what we call an isometric. It's yeah. So like, axonometric is the architecture drawing version of that. So we have I have them do those, and then I have them do diagrams. So the diagrams are more abstracted. They can be about a topic, like what is the golden path, or what is the safe area to be versus the area where you're going to be attacked, or things like that. You just use shading and color, or whatever it is, to create a diagram of this space. And what that does is we start to see students use more, they use more analytical language when talking about their levels, because now they've been through a practice of actually doing it. And I have them do it by hand, because I want them to be rough. I want them to do it as they play. I don't want them to be like stuck at the computer. I want them to be kind of free from the glowy rectangle. And some of them love that. Some of them love that the analysis, doesn't keep them to something that can break. It doesn't keep them to like, oh shoot, Photoshop is giving me a hard time or something like that. Some of them are terrified because it doesn't have Control Z. So I have them draw these things, and then this magical thing starts happening where they start to go beyond the drawing types that I've recommended, and they start to use other drawing types, like maybe first-person perspectives, or draw screenshots, or things like that. Draw flow charts. They'll start incorporating flow charts when I don't even ask for them, and they'll do different types of analysis. What does it mean to speed run this space versus play it normally, or something like that? And then we start to see in their sketchbooks where they might have gone and been a person who uses a lot of text or uses only drawings. They start to use more text and drawings mixed, and their language with which they analyze becomes more complex and more inclusive of different ways to analyze, and they get a better framing of that space that they just played through. So using those hand-drawn tools, we found helps them not only analyze in a more thorough fashion, but also like ideate in a thorough fashion, because then they take that idea and then they just use it when they plan out their own levels. So it's, in an age where we are worried about people using like artificial intelligence to do the digital work for themselves, this kind of takes people out of it. And then I think it has, a lot of the students have found it really refreshing.
Right. So, like in terms of like the AI you mentioned, so I think now a lot of games also started to do like experiments on like auto-generated level design or something like that. Like, do you have any thoughts on those kind of things?
Um, Procedural generation's not new, Diablo and all those other things, but usually those have some sort of human based component they're designing with chunks. I think one of the things that we've seen is that the tools that are, every time I see one of these things, I watch the video and I start looking at it and breaking it down. And one of the things we've seen is that it can generate content, but that content doesn't necessarily respond to any kind of like human design factor. Some of the times I've seen these things generate things, it's just sort of like, okay, it's there, but it's kind of bland. It feels like almost like an N64 game at times. And I love N64 games, but some of them are like just big empty spaces because they were still figuring out 3D, right? Um, so there's that component of it too. And then I think we're just seeing audiences think that AI generated content is inauthentic in games, and studios really get hammered for using it. So um, I'm sure there are people that are going to use it. Like it's going to happen, and I have the luxury of being mean about AI as a like a tenured professor at a university that can just kind of make whatever weird games he wants. So I sympathize with people who are at jobs where the boss says you have to use it. But in cases where you don't, it's pretty cool to be able to make like authentically human work.
Right, right. Awesome. Thank you, thank you. So let's just shift the topic a little bit to talk about like the architecture you mentioned in your book a little bit more. I think you used the term genius loci in
Mm-hmm.
your book, and I think that means the spirit of the place, and which is used to describe like how spaces communicate feelings. So I
Mm-hmm.
think in architecture, this might mean like either light, either proportion, or material. So like, what is the spirit of the place is going to look in a digital world? It's like how can designers make a virtual environment feel alive or memorable or say emotionally grounded?
So this has actually been the topic of some of my academic writing, and some of my newer writing in the new book. I do a section on this idea. Um, so there's a few factors. So architectural philosopher Christian Norbert Schultz talks about what makes the spirit of place occur in architectural spaces, and I don't have my notes on it in front of me, so I can't remember exactly which what his terminology is. But for games, I looked at that and I was like, I wonder if there are parallels here. And one of the things that I've looked at when migrating that that sense to games and think about it as like a framework that designers can use, because like when I do my game studies, I try to make something that is something that somebody can use to design, right? I'm very much the like practical theory type of writer. So in Genius Loci in video games, I'm looking at um, let me think about this. One of them is the craft of the world itself. So we have the um, just the way in which you make the world, the way in which um, you build the world. I mean, literally the art assets, and I think that has a lot to do with creating a sense of verisimilitude, creating a sense that this place is real. Um, Part of that is building context in the gameplay and in the game narrative. And I use the example of the Spencer Mansion. I really love the Spencer Mansion in the original Resident Evil and the remake and the remake and how many all those different remakes. But it has a wonderful sense of place to it. It feels like a real space. And part of that is that it has this craft to it. It feels like a real space. It feels like a house with a continuity, whereas it doesn't. Like, yes, it's a game world and it's kind of just a big a dungeon, but also feels like it has the functional elements of a house too. And then the other part of it is that it is given this history. Now it's given this backstory, but even in like the remake, it has this, like, we know who the architect is now, and they do this wonderful trick where they not only identify the architect, but then they make him the architect of several places throughout the Resident Evil series, up until even like recent ones. They'll have like some placard that his firm worked on a house. Like, I think one of the houses in Resident Evil 7 even does it. The ships from Revelations, is his firm and things like that. And that seems like a fun little Easter egg, but also it matters because then the idea of I need to get into my house and oh shoot, I left my other half of this ox statue at the office is like now part of this guy's design practice, sort of, if we think about it. So there's this placement of this realness in this world, as goofy as it may be, that they really tried to build. So there's that spirit of place. Um, Gameplay, exciting gameplay happening in that game gives it a spirit of place. So you remember when you saw different zombies, you remember when you fought different enemies, things like that. And then I think another thing that contributes to this is revisiting. The type of game that Resident Evil is, or Metroid, or Castlevania Symphony of the Night, or Mother 3. And I talk about Tazmily Village and Mother 3 in a few places in some of these discussions. You don't just visit them once as like you would like level 1 in Mario. You visit them multiple times. You might see them grow and change. Resident Evil, like, you have to revisit places and there's new monsters, and those new monsters recontextualize the space in different ways because now you're interacting in a different way in that space. Tazmily Village in Mother 3 literally changes. Like, it is a rural community that is slowly given technology, and what happens to the people that live there when they are given technology. So that's another thing that creates this sort of spirit of place. And all of this is to say that what Schultz is looking for is to build a sense of that you feel like you have an anchoring in that place. And it's called dwelling. It's a Heidegger principle of this idea of having like a sort of anchoring or a relationship in the place you're in, and that gives you some sort of agency within it. And I think that's really important. That's something that we should really try to achieve in level design. This is actually one of the reasons I love Metroidvanias so much. And I've written about them in this newer book, the World Design for 2D Action Adventures, because it was like, this is a whole other sense of level type that is about that. It's about liking going back to Zebes, right? Or Dracula's castle, or wherever. So that's something that I think is like a big goal for level designers that we should really push for.
Right. Since you mentioned like Metrovania, there's one question for you. Is that personally, I think verticality is probably my keyword when I try to design a level. Is to try to connect different parts of the level, like different spaces, to make them make you can see something from one side, and while you're reaching the other side, you realize, oh, that's where I came from. So I wonder if there's any like one keyword that you really care about when you're trying to do any like level design work.
Oh man. Real quick on verticality. This is another reason why I have students draw sections, because then they have to draw the verticality, and they're levels that would be very flat. It's like, now you realize your level's flat. So because you asked about the drawings before. word that I would go with, that's a fascinating question. Because I'm trying to think of stuff that we talk about on the team for Little Nemo and the Nightmare Fiends. Um, I think place, you know, this idea of genius loci in the sense of place is very important to me. I think what is the world beyond the world, and some of that's narrative design, some of that's level design, and some of that's environment art. So this goes into that whole like it's an art of other arts, right? So it's fun to make a level that feels like a place, like it feels like it makes navigable sense, but then it feels fun to put um, a piece of environment art that gives you a sense of what that place is when you're not there in a video game in it. Um, a distinct architectural identity, things like that. Um, and then I've ended up writing some of like the dialogue in some of the last few games I've worked on, and I really enjoy it. And there's lots of opportunities to be like, our old friend, the mosquito farmer, is back. We know how to deal with him, for some like villain in the game, right? And like you don't need to tell the player, you don't need to give a flashback of like the last time that person met this character. You just say that, and then the fan comics will start like forming in somebody's mind, right? And I think that's delightful. I love leaving these little like loose ends that people can take and fill in, and I think that is part of like how you breadcrumb that through your game world and in your levels. I think is really important for building like a sense of place.
Right, and I think it was a great example you used to describe like how game worlds as spaces that can teach players, through the information like light, like form, like layout, like rather than you give a text or dialogue to just directly give out information. So I would say like how do you think architects and level designers share a responsibility to design environments that kind of communicates like rather than you just try to instruct the players. For example, like when you think about places, people were saying, "Oh, I'm going to do this tutorial, which is going to do a step-by-step kind of instruction to let you know how to play through a certain process." But like when you do a special like space design, I think you're trying to leaning to rather than like a mindset of a level designer, but more like an architect. So, how do you think what is in common between the two different roles?
Um, so I think really great architecture has a sense of like total design. Um, I was at Falling Water in April, Frank Lloyd Wright's famous house that he made for the Kaufman family in Pennsylvania, and excuse me, they there's this theme of expansion and contraction in it. So contraction is when you're like walking through the woods and the woods are very heavy, but then you come out from the heavy brush and then there's the house. Um, excuse me, it's like revealed to you. Or you go through a very tight hallway and then you go into the living room and it's like revealed to you. And this expansion contraction is everywhere. It is going down a staircase and then there's like just a little bit of hallway that is just this delightful little view. I wasn't on That was during the part of the tour where like I couldn't take pictures. I wish I could share a picture of this like delightful little like landing that is just perfect. Um, but it's um, it's everywhere. And I think in spatial design, when we think about spatial design in video games, I mentioned like Nintendo 64 games, and I critiqued like their level design. I don't. That was when people were figuring out three dimensions, right? And I think a lot of the ones, even though they're figuring it out, are still very good. Um, but there was a period where there was a like, we're going to make New York in a game, and then it's just New York, and then it's like, but it's as confusing as a major city in the U.S. might be. Um, And that's because there was the technological stunt of doing it, but then you had this like layer of user interface on top that did the work of navigating for you. And I like to tell my students, like, you're going to have a UI. I was at a conference once where I used this example, and somebody's like, "Why were you against UI?" I'm like, "No, I'm not against UI. Have UIs." But you know, you're going to have a UI, and the UI is going to have a mini map and a compass and all that other fun stuff. But have the world also be like have the player also have be able to orient themselves in the world. Have like a giant tower with smoke coming out of it, and then oh, it's next to the giant tower with smoke coming out of it. Have a change in vegetation. Have a this is the lava part, and that's the mines, and that's the snowy area, right? Have themes, have districts, have edges. Um, have these different wayfinding points that the player can form that, like, again, the Christian Norbert Schalk's placenets, existential foothold. That's what he called it, is find the existential foothold in the place. If you can do that and you have the mini map guide thing, that's really wonderful. And then, where it comes into like where they share, this is something that architects have talked about and urbanists have talked about for centuries, right? Kevin Lynch's Image of the City is just a book where he like talks smack about cities that he thinks did not do a very good job, but then also cities where he does think that they did a good job, and then that's where he gives us his principles of navigable cities. So I think things like light, space, height, color, these are in our toolbox. Architects have given us a language with which to use it. I think this is one way that we can like learn from them, and then they can learn from us in terms of making spaces that really are player focused, as opposed to simply formal.
Right. And there's one element I didn't mention. I think it's sound. You also mentioned in your book, like you talk about this sound. I think for like chapter 13,
Mm-hmm.
you wrote about that sound as part of the spatial design, and it shapes how players feel scale, feel distance, or feel the material. So, like, how do you think like architects and level designers can use rhythm or silence or like acoustics to give emotional weight to a, like, let's say, virtual environments?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think silence is incredibly underutilized. I think there is like moments of silence in games. It's like I live in Ohio, and it's snowy here in the winter, and there is something kind of amazing about going outside when there's heavy snow, because it just absorbs every sound. It's a different kind of quiet. It's magnificent. Um, I love it when games use sound in ways that signal like, oh, something's about to happen, it's about to get real. I love those moments, or I love just moments of rest. I think it is wonderful when games let you stop and smell the roses a little bit, let you play. Not even like, it doesn't even have to be active play. It can just be like taking in the world, seeing the space. One of my favorite moments in No Man's Sky is when you take off into space the first time, because then you just get to be like, wow, look at this. And the game is just perfect for a moment before you be like, oh no, now I'm getting attacked, or something, right? So I love those moments where you do get to just sort of like stop and enjoy the world. I think this is where like uh, the idea of the rewarding vista is so important. Like, do a challenge and then have that thing where you can see something cool and just take a moment to appreciate it. It doesn't, and I think silence, rhythm, things like that are so important in communicating or enhancing those moments. Rhythm is also something to really think about in terms of game pacing. I think games have rhythm, people respond to those rhythms. They kind of get it. It's nice to get a sense of when a boss is coming or when a treasure is coming. Um, I was telling somebody today about how, this isn't audio rhythm, but visual rhythm helps affect how people move through space. If the tiles on a floor are smaller, we will make our steps shorter and vice versa. They use that in shopping malls in front of stores. They use that in casinos to make people, which is not great, to make people slow down in front of like slot machines and stuff. Again, not great. But great power, great responsibility, and whatnot. But those again, those aren't audio rhythm, but all of those things come into how we as humans respond to the rhythms about us or around us. And I think they can reward, enhance, drive action. And I even once, was not happy with the general environment art of an environment I was working on. And then our composer's audio track for that level came in, and I was like, I know what I need to do, and the composer like saved a level from my game in environment art terms. So yeah, audio is, as a non-audio person, audio is magic. I think is such an important part of what we do.
Right. So, like as you were saying, I think it's about making a level design or certain space like convincing by implement a series like meaningful choices, meaningful design choices, and then I think here comes like a question that I think not just like student teams but also like professional teams tend to face, which is like how to balance between the meaningful design choices and the like more artistic kind of feeling kind of thing, say based on realism, that we're trying to make the like visually the space a little more convincing. So can you share about like your thoughts about like how to balance those two aspects?
Hmm. Wait, so when you say realism, do you mean like I'm recreating a historic space, or do you mean like I'm trying to make the house feel like a house? Or
Yeah, so it's basically about like reproducing the real world is basically gonna make the level like feel more convincing, more
okay,
immersive. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Again, making Metroidvania and a game where like, why does this palace have spikes? Or I remember, oh my gosh, one that really um in the six like in the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis age, there was like a Spider-Man game that was based on the old cartoon. And it was like one of the levels was like, oh, it's this bad guy's apartment. You got to break into his penthouse. And he had just these like big giant blocks of terrain, like just like apartment themed beige level geometry. I'm like, what a weird apartment. Huh. Um, so yeah, I think there is that balance. When you talk about the meaningful choices, I think like a good example of this is like the Hitman games. Those games feel like such real places that are also like totally video game environments. Um, I really One of the things that I feel like I'm telling a lot of students when they're level designing is make it smaller. Like they make these big spaces. Again, it's that sort of like I'm figuring out level design in 3D feel, right? I think it happened as an industry in one period, but I think you still like students, and I don't say this is a bad thing. I'm not like finger wagging at students. So like students in the room, don't worry. Um, I'm thinking of it more in terms of like the lessons a person needs to know the first time they do a thing, right? And so I see students have to think about that a lot. And I think smallness, like learning to pare your level down and make small spaces really sing, are good at building that realism. Not every level in a space has to be a church. Not every level in a space has to be epic. Like I had a student one time that was former military, and he like decided that the game he wanted to make was like a breach and clear kind of action shooter game, and would make these like little apartments with these like very tiny layouts, and they were brilliant. And I think when you pack in that smallness, that intimacy, it can make things feel very real, very um, relatable, but they also function really well as game spaces. It's almost like, real world spaces don't make great game levels, but you can add enough sort of like verisimilitude and recognizable things to be like, oh yeah, no, that's a house, even if like no house would ever be laid out like that, or if it's like some billionaire's mansion or something like that.
Right. But I would say like in order to do a like proper and good level design, you still have to find like a lot of references from the real world
Mm-hmm.
of the architectures, right? So do you think there's any way that you can just properly utilize those references, not just like, okay, I'm going to take this into my game, I'm going to use it as a as a certain space, I'm going to apply a certain function to it. Like instead of that, like what is the way that you think is going to best like effectively utilizing those materials?
So do you mean like literally the from an environment art perspective, or do you think like from a perspective of just general realness, or like actually using specific
Oh,
references?
it's like the from the artistic kind of perspective, like visually how it's going to look like. I'm just going to use it to rely on to create my own level, kind of thing.
Um, I think, and I say this as I stare at Tracy's background on our like Zoom chat, which I think has like this really compelling balcony and axis, with these windows on the side. And I'm
Oh,
imagining, I'm actually imagining this level. Like I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about the kind of
nice.
gameplay you could have in this space, like sneaking through this balcony and things like that. And I think when,
Nice.
yeah, you're using real world reference, I think one of the things is learn to evaluate reference well. And I think that gets into learning to analyze architecture well. Um, to me, it comes down to strength of reference, right? It's hard to get a good reference out of just any old space. I think when you see a space like this one that I'm looking at on the digital background, um, that's really compelling. Like it has a rhythm with the columns and with the beams extending from the columns into the wall, above the doors and things like that. And I think like there is I realize I'm describing this thing that nobody is looking at right now.
I'm showing it to them.
Okay. And like there is a satisfying rhythm to this. Like I want to go down, it's not a very long balcony, but I want to go down it because I'm seeing these columns and these doorways and these repeating elements. Oh, that was the other thing about rhythm. Rhythm visually draws you towards a place, it draws you through space. So do it. It's good. And so that to me is like I'm looking at this and this has a lovely sense of realism, especially with the plants and everything. I'm like, okay, what is this? Is this the like assassin level where I'm sneaking through? Like this looks like the villa in like Perfect Dark, maybe the original Perfect Dark. Um, and so I think part of it is like that's a reference that I would want to keep and use. I use a lot of Antoni Gaudi architecture as a reference in my current project, um, because I love how his architecture and his columns create these vast perspective effects and these like orchards of trees looking things. Um,
You do realize, Chris, that now all my students are going to make levels of the School of Cinematic Arts, which is
great,
what my
great,
background is.
amazing. Uh,
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, I think like part of that just really is like if you learn architecture, you're going to have this back catalog of references that are going to help you find those the spatial ingredients through which you can make meaningful choices. And then also, from the environment art perspective, it's gonna, I mean, right here, I have a book called A Concise History of Architectural Styles. And I just am like, I need a place that looks like this. Let me look through it. Some of it really is just like building yourself a library of references, both in literal books, but then just kind of going and seeing a place, analyzing it, looking at it, thinking like, oh, that's beautiful. I should kind of keep this in my design pocket for later, right?
Right. Awesome. Thank you. So let's again shift the topic a little bit. I just want to ask about like from the cultural aspect. Like how can world building draw inspiration from different architectural traditions? Like say, I think you mentioned like some Japanese methodology in your book. For example, like Japanese asymmetry, or say like Gothic verticality, or like Islamic geometry. Like to use these to create like unique cultural experiences in games.
I um if you're going to go in on those things, first I would say make sure you are consulting with folks from those cultures. I say that as a person that tries to be very sensitive about like making sure I'm not misappropriating things like that. So make sure if you are going to go all in on those things, you've worked with somebody. Um, that that being said, all of those things arranged and in the right place, yeah, I would absolutely think that these are opportunities. Some of the best gaming experiences I've had have been ones from games that surprise me because they are based in places that I've not been or are from cultures that I do not see represented in games very much. And I really welcome more of that. South of Midnight has me very excited. Other games, where like I recently just played, the reason N64 was on my mind is I recently just played Mystical Ninja starring Goemon for the first time. And that was a particular type of Japaneseness that in 1998 was very new to the United States, and I really appreciated that game for it. Um, and so I think, yeah, like where I love seeing that stuff is when you get into the aesthetics of these places. It does go deeper than just like, I'm going to slap this environment art on there. There are traditions, and this is one of the things that I think is lovely about like Assassin's Creed games. Um, they go there. They hire a historian. They like study the traditions. They study the art, the architecture, the culture, and I think that really shines through in some of those games in a very positive way. So yeah, this is one of those things that I think like again, when you learn to look at architecture, you learn to really dive deep into all the aspects that influence the design, influence that place. Because like that building doesn't it exists. It was designed in a time and a place and a function. And then its time, place, function has changed over centuries, maybe, millennia, maybe. And it may continue to have a cultural relevancy. So you can look at that change as it occurs over time and discover new things about how space was conducted then versus now. What can we learn from it? What is it showing us that our buildings, you know, where we aren't, right? I live in Northeast Ohio. There are not Gothic churches around here. So it's the kind of, I mean, they're, Gothic style churches, maybe, in a few places. So those are the kind of things that we really do try to, the more different experiences and spaces and places you're aware of from different cultural perspectives, that's going to give you more to enhance. Even if you're making something that's not a recreation of an actual historic place, you can inject some of that into the way you think about a culture in a world that you up, right?
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Now we're gonna give the time to our audience to have some like Q&A opportunities.
Hi, Professor. I'm Anastasia. I'm a first-year MFA student here, and I'm just starting my learning of becoming a how to do level design. So the talk that you gave is very inspiring, and I just wanted to ask, when I'm starting to learn level design, I found that it's actually an implementation of several different aspects of the gameplay. Like it can carry narrative, it can have like aesthetics, and it also like guides the player through the game. So it's actually implement some mechanics, and so I'm actually kind of like thinking when I'm focusing on one aspect, it's very easier for me to ignore another aspect. So I'm kind of want to know if there's your like, do you have any suggested approach or workflow to like putting all these aspects into consideration and how to balance them, and even how to like using them to contribute to each other.
Oh, I love this question. In terms of like you're really talking about like how do you keep all the plates in the air, and I think so. One of the reasons I have my students do a Metroidvania design in my class is actually precisely this reason, is that there are so many things that they have to balance. It really is a genre that forces you to do it. But I think, yeah, you're right. It does do any game. You have to keep these different things going. One of the things about game design, students, that I want you all to understand is that like that's different from architecture. Architecture, you have to have all the right answers. You can only build it once. So you design it right the first time. You have to have all the answers. Now, those architects that use game engines to play test their buildings, they're onto something. Because then you don't just have to build it once, at least not in literal real world form. We get to play test. We get to try it out. So play testing early, often, and a lot. Even, don't even make it nice. The first one should be big, chunky gray box models. That will help you see what's working, what doesn't. The more you play test, and I know for students, like it can be very difficult. They can be shy. They can be like, oh, who am I going to play test with? Just go out there and do it. I always tell my students, I'm like, you're at a university. Just go out and be like, video game designer here, test my game. But playtesting is wonderful in this way because you don't have to have all the answers. You can have an idea, and then you can like put it in front of somebody and be like, maybe it works. And then if it doesn't, you kill the unfun, and then you try again. The other thing that I recommend is that, and we're doing this right now for my game Little Nemo. Have another set of eyes. When you've been looking at that level for too long, you are going to miss stuff, even when you're experienced. And me and one of my co-designers, Adrian Sandoval, we have been staring at these levels for too gosh darn long. And so one of my former students, who's an alum and has worked on a few projects as a level designer in the industry, he's on the project too. And we're like, why don't we have a max pass on this level? And he is not constrained by any of this, looking at it for multiple years at this point. So he just goes and like, I've recreated this room and I've added locks and keys and these puzzles to it. I'm like, great, amazing. And it totally transforms it. So yeah, get up and go for a walk, have somebody else look at it, team up. Always work on teams. Teams are great because then you're not alone and you have support. And level design can be really tough because, again, it's a lot of plates in the air. You're like you said, you're balancing everything.
Thank you so much.
Oh, and then Brian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much for coming, Chris. Oh, by the speaker.
It's okay.
I'm designing a 3D co-op platformer right now, and with a team of people. And one of the things that we're running into is that designing the space in 3D, the camera's great, and sometimes it's our own worst enemy. And being able to create this platforming experience where we are able to have these like cool puzzles and display the information properly for like players to understand where they're gonna go or what they're gonna do, while also having it be like you can turn and look anywhere you want, is a huge challenge. If you have any advice for that.
Help me, Obi-Wan.
But we
Yes,
got
exactly.
cameras are terrible. Yeah, I think like in pure level design terms, because I mean, yeah, like you could always program a really good camera, right? But that takes time and people and everything. And so I'm wondering if there's some way you can, we talked a lot about like light and color as a way to direct the eye and something like that. And I'm wondering if there is like something that you can make sure you add in your level if there's a space you want the player to look at or check, because you're talking about like displaying information to the player, and if it's like if it's not like UI related or something, maybe it's like, oh, do the three green lights turn to red lights or something like that. If you could like architecturally highlight those spaces with a God ray coming down or a different color or something, not knowing like the specifics of what your game is, those tricks can help you do two things. One is it highlights the information, but then two, it gives you a sort of like reference point. Like I always know that I am where I am in relation to the if you've been to Disneyland, right? Like you always kind of check where you are in Disneyland based on where you are. In Disneyland, it's Sleeping Beauty's castle, right?
Yes.
I've never been to Disneyland. I've only been to World.
Yes, you are correct.
It's Sleeping Beauty's castle. So you kind of know where you are according to Sleeping Beauty's castle is where you're oriented in the park. In a 3D world of any kind, having that kind of landmark is going to help you have that sort of point of return and like recentering. So yeah. Now, again, glitchy cameras, that's more of like have somebody undertake the project of building a good camera. It only took the industry like over a decade. I'm sure it'll take you 2 days. That's fine. But yeah, no, I mean, that's always a big challenge. So yeah, anything you can do with level design to kind of help the player orient themselves, I think is like really good.
Thank you.
That helps.
Brian first.
Hey, Chris. You mentioned the Vista as reward. In the one level design class I taught like 10 years ago, I used your book as a reference, but I obsessed over teaching my own bugbear with level design, vistas and controlling access to vistas, and particularly corner turning, going through doors, and the vista as anticipatory play. So you introduce a new vista. How does the player play through it in their head before they experience it? And so how do you teach your students not about the vista as a reward, but the vista as a play space for the mind?
Oh man. Okay, so now I need to add a new whole section to, because that's good. That's really good. No, so one of the things that so I also teach animation. And I teach my students about silhouettes. And silhouettes, for those who are not animators, are really important because our eyes are going to see the silhouette of a character first before they see the details. So you help create appeal and recognizability in a character, and you help the composition by having a strong silhouette. Silhouette is like if you were to take a character on screen and put them into Photoshop, like in a pose, and right-click blending options, color overlay black, that character, that's the silhouette, right? We see that first. So the vista is important because you want to build a good set of silhouettes so that the player can turn that corner, and in that second, their brain is going to process that. So before they process necessarily the detail of the information. So if you have, like Halo is great. End of sentence. No, Halo is great because the enemies have distinct silhouettes. Like you know what you're looking at when you scan an area, when you turn a corner, you scan an area, and you're like grunt, jackal, elite. And so now you really get a sense of like what you're facing, and you have this like mental dictionary of like what each one does and how to deal with them. So I think that's when you talk about anticipatory play, I think it is making the vista, again, craft. It's all about that craft. If we are crafting the assets that we use to make the vista in such a way, and then making the vista itself crafted carefully so that we turn the corner and the play pieces of sorts are giving us a silhouette against the noise of the environment, I think then, yeah, you're going to give more pleasure in the anticipatory play, and if it's not like you turn the corner and then something's like kind of obscured and fudged and then you get shot and you're dead.
Can
right?
I chime in on this, Chris?
Also,
Yeah.
I'm chiming as well.
And
You chime in first.
build on your example of Disneyland for a second. So I think in Pirates of the Caribbean is an excellent example of architectural silhouetting, to use your term, because you hear the next scene before you see it. And
Yes.
you hear the cannons roar while you're still in the little channel that before it opens up into like the big battle scene, for example. You are hearing it and you are thinking, oh my god, there's a huge battle around that corner. And boom, there it is. And it's already painted and animated in your mind so that when you see it, it is in fact grander because you've already built it in your mind.
If I could just
And
follow
that
quickly.
and that goes back to the other point about audio, is that audio can also preview what is about to come.
Around the corner. Yeah.
So, what I'm taking away from what you said about the vista and silhouettes, and I would say now, if I was teaching the class again, I would say, whenever reveal in a vista, think about the player's eye movement in purely architectural terms to detail points. Like, oh, that's a long place. I could go in a long way, but there's a side passage I might explore. There's a pit down there. It's like layered like viewpoints, so you can see like clear options that are highlighted and that the player can prioritize. Like they've done those things with mapping how people's eyes travel through paintings. Do that when you're thinking about a vista at a reveal and a level design. That's
Well, and when you said reveal, it also made me think of that Japanese design principle of oku, and you have like in a lot of like bigger houses, right? You get these sequences of spaces where you go through a pathway, and then you might get a screen that shows you the preview of the space you're going to get to, but then you go around a corner and you see the full view. And that's also like Christopher Alexander's Zen view, right? Where you get the little window and then you get the big reveal later. Or, that Frank Lloyd Wright house that's on the honeycomb grid where you see the peek around the corner. Same thing with Zelda, and everything was a triangle in Breath of the Wild. I know I'm just like rattling off references here, but those peaks, those reveals, those hints, all of those things, it's again animation. Animation is, having done a bunch of animation now it's animated approach to level design, but it's the anticipation before the movement, right? In principle of animation terms, you find these little ways to anticipate the reveal, and then you do the reveal. So I think those are really good ways of approaching it, is like, how do we telegraph?
I think we have time for one more question before we have to be respectful of everyone's evening.
Hello, my name is Olivia, and I'm a second-year MFA student in IMJD program. So I had this question. So over the summer break, I interned at a architectural design studio, and I'm a 3D artist myself. And one thing I noticed was that game scenes, when we create game scenes, we don't really like I didn't really think about the dimensions and exact like numbers when we put models in the engine, but when I worked there, like that was everything we cared about.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask, when you make your games, do you think about it a lot, or how does it like in your architecture brain? How does it function in game engines?
So I did something silly in architecture school and I got into 3D modeling, which is where you work a lot with proportion and you're making these things that are not construction documents. So like in my plans, I have, dimension lines. In my models, it's just like, as long as things kind of line up, right? Which I had to explain to a very frustrated partner in a firm once. But proportion is really important. The thing with games is that the actual dimensions are never the dimensions that you're going to perceive. A door like the one I'm like next to right here is 7 foot by 3 foot usually, but if you were to make a door 7 foot by 3 foot in a game with how there is distortion based on the camera, it's going to look really tiny. It's going to look like your character is actually like hitting or like bumping their head, even though they're not. Unless you're like Master Chief, who's like very tall. But the so yeah, I don't really think in terms of exact dimensions, but I think in terms of if you think about the proportion that you want the space to look like, and this is where architecture can help you because you do start to see building proportions really well. You start to see how things are constructed. You start to see things like, when you're making your environment art for your scene, what, a baseboard or wainscoting on a wall does to transition from floor to wall. And it gives that sense of realism and just visual detail, right? So each of those details will help you. But yeah, dimensions are very wibbly wobbly in game engines because of the way game engine cameras work. So you don't really need to. It can help you start that way, but I think it'll always feel smaller than you intend it to feel. And again, that's where gray boxing is so good. Is you just, if you make the thing in gray box, you can try it again until you get the right feel that you want.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent question.
All right, thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for joining us and to share all these insights about architecture and level design. And thank you, everyone, for coming to this episode. And we'll see you soon on the next one.
Thanks. This was my pleasure. This was amazing.